Today I'm doing a follow-up video on a previous video I did. It was called Developing the Palate. It was a how-to video on the beginnings of how to develop your palate. If you're going to be a good cook, if you're going to be a chef, you have to develop your palate. There's no way you can know what this flavor and this flavor are going to taste like until you put the two together. And you're not going to know what each of those tastes like separate without having tried them. For instance, I could tell you what cinnamon tastes like. What would I say? It tastes woody. After all, it's bark. People will say to me, oh, it doesn't taste woody. Well, yeah, it's bark, all right? It tastes like wood, okay? Because it is wood. And so it's the wood of the cinnamon tree. The cassia tree is very similar also. And we take the bark and grind it into a powder. We call that cinnamon. Now, you can't know what cinnamon tastes like until you taste it. And if you haven't done that, well, for goodness sakes, mix a teaspoon of cinnamon with 2 tablespoons of sugar and gently dust that over the top of some bread that you've spread butter over. So dust it directly onto the butter and then toast it. We call that cinnamon toast. All right, it's delicious and it will let you know exactly what cinnamon tastes like. There are lots, and I mean lots, of different kinds of spices, lots of different kinds of herbs, and the combination of all of these different flavors, when used the right way, is absolutely incredible. You go and you start putting, well, let me put it this way. Let's talk about a marinara. You want to develop flavor in a marinara, so you're going to have to do more than just heat some tomato sauce. You need some herbs in there to provide flavor. Marinaras, for the most part, are really centered around the use of herbs. So, what do we put in a marinara? Well, basil, number one. I would say that's probably the number one most commonly used flavor when it comes to a marinara sauce. Other flavors would be rosemary, thyme. Believe it or not, oregano is sometimes used. Salt is often placed in such, generally to bring out the other flavors, to let them pop. Sometimes garlic is used. Garlic's not an herb, that's a spice. But it's also a member of the onion family. There's so many different flavors, and there's only one way to know them. You're going to have to taste them. Now with the herbs, it's simple enough. There's not a lot of different herbs relative to the number of different spices. Herbs, those flavors can easily be determined and understood by making a simple tea. A half a teaspoon in a small amount of hot water, let that steep, then just simply taste it. No one says you have to swallow it. Just taste it and learn about it. Know what the flavor is. Know what it is so you'll know how to use it. One of the flavorings that I like to put in taco meat is an herb called oregano. Oregano is commonly used in Mexico. Mexican oregano is a very popular thing, and it has a little more pungent flavor than the French variety, sometimes called marjoram. All right, so the French oregano, a little bit milder. I like the Mexican oregano. I like the bite that it has. I like the way it comes through in my food, but you have to learn to use less of it. There's only one way to know that, and that's to try both of them. Just because you've tasted one kind of oregano doesn't mean you have a palate that is discerning for oregano. So you need to try what's available. It's like basil. There's different kinds of basil. There's purple leaf basil, which tastes similar to, but not the same as the greener varieties. Okay? So all of these different items, please try them. We take a look at all of the different spices. Some of them are from seeds. Some of them come from tubers or, rhizomes, you can say, the roots. Some of those spices come from pods. For instance, if you take a chili pod and dry that, and then you grind it into a powder, you have chili powder. And, that would be on my shelf, the cayenne, the paprika. Those are both types of chili powder, and I love to use those. Okay, so that's the pod of a chili that was ground up. Yet when you're talking about something like, let's say, coriander, well, that is a seed that comes from the cilantro plant. Now, in Europe, some people call the leaves coriander also, which makes it kind of confusing overall. In the United States, we use the term cilantro for the leaves and coriander for the seeds of the same plant. All right, so sometimes the same plant can yield two different things. Herbs, widely available, but spices, folks, wars have been fought over spices. Spices, well, some people say they're the spice of life, but they give you a lot of flavors, and there's a lot more of them. Spices are robust and intense most of the time, but sometimes they're very, very mild. For instance, annatto. Annatto is often used for its color. It's a bold yellow color, the same way turmeric is a bold yellow color. Annatto is a very mild flavor, very light. It's in the background. Where another yellow spice, like turmeric, is robust. It'll hit you hard. It goes well in a rice pilaf, though. Folks, please, give these different items a taste and never try them in combination. If you want to learn what basil tastes like, well, don't combine it with a bunch of other herbs and try to think you know what basil tastes like. You need to try it by itself so you'll have an ability to pick that out in a dish and to say, yes, I want more or less of this particular flavor, and that's because you know what it is. Now, we've been taking a look at various different flavors and spices. None of these items, so you folks will know right off the bat, I'm not endorsing anything here. I'm not endorsing any labels or any brands. I'm not being paid. There is none of that going on. I simply want to give you a good cross-section of the many different flavors that are available. Look at all these. Look at all those bottles. Wow. That's not all of them. That's just a little bit. Just a small portion of the spices and herbs you can have. As you can see, there's a lot of seasonings that I have sitting out here. I guess this was good because it gave me a chance to clean off the bottles that get used a little bit less. They had a little dust on them. There's some things I'm going to use weekly. Paprika, cumin, salt, things like that in my diet are common. It's southwestern flavors, all right? That's very common to a southwestern diet. Other flavors that are good but not so common, and I don't use them as much. Let me pick something out here. I'm going to choose mustard. I'm going to use mustard from time to time. If I'm making, let's say, a dish that's got a lot of eggs and cheese in it, let's say a quiche, I'll put a little mustard in there. If I'm going to make, let's say, a potato soup, let's say I do a cream of potato soup, a warm country-style cream of potato, and that's, it's not with the chunks and this little smooth and creamy stuff. I'll put a little of this in there. Gives it a little bite, a little flavor. The mustard's fantastic for things like that. But do I use it in my tacos? No, it won't work for that. Okay, so there's certain things that I want to use at certain times and other things for other things. I will use cloves from time to time, but that's usually seasonal. I use cloves more in the fall, around the holidays. They go well in cakes, like spice cakes and other wonderful dishes. If you want to season up the outside of a ham, cloves. It's a great way to do it. It imparts an intense flavor. In that case, you don't use the ground cloves, you use the whole ones. There's a lot of different ways to bring in your flavors. And spices and herbs are just one of those ways. So please taste each and every one of them. And as you do, you've just added another spice or another herb to the things that you will be cooking. And a good way to start this, if you don't have any, begin with a marinara. I think it's a great way to start a collection of spices and herbs. For a marinara, you'll need some garlic and basil. You might want some oregano or rosemary or thyme in that. So all of those items would work well for marinara. Even some wine. Wine is another one of those flavors. It's not just something to be drank. It is also a flavorant for our foods, and it brings in a fruitiness to our food without adding too much sugar to it. And it's a great way of doing that. Lots of different flavors and lots of different ways to apply them. Herbs and spices are only one of those. There's flavors throughout. And when it comes to sauces and liquids of all types, it's just limitless. Let's take a look at a few of those items as well. Okay, we've been discussing, as you've seen, herbs and spices, and we're about to move into some other stuff. But I want to define the herbs and spices just a little bit. What is an herb? An herb is a leaf, okay? Plain and simple. All of the herbs that you saw there, those were all leaves, every single last one of them. Basil, oregano, tarragon, thyme, even rosemary, even though it feels like a stiff twig or piece of wood, that's actually a leaf. Now, something else is also the spices. What defines what is a spice? Well, a spice is seeds, seed pods. Sometimes the roots of a plant are used as a spice. An example would be ginger. Another is turmeric. They're both related, and they are both rhizomes. So you take that root, you dry it a little bit, you grind it or grate it up, and boom, you have a fantastic seasoning. They're both very good for you. They're both very good for digestion. They can calm a bad stomach, okay? So there are really some neat things there. But that's what your spice is. Your spices are those items. They're dried and ground. And so you have a lot more options there. Herbs, they're plentiful, but to my knowledge, I really believe that there's probably about twice as many spices as there are herbs. And flavors abundant throughout. And even more flavors abundant with the combination of those. If you learn to combine them the right way, the limits are just unbelievable. It runs into the millions of different combinations. So give those a try. Now there's also extracts. Peppermint extract. So there you've taken an herb, a leafy green, and you've turned that into an extract. And an extract is simply where they take the oils out of something and then float those, usually in alcohol, and that becomes what they call an extract. So mint extract is simply mint oil floating in some alcohol, and you put that in your ice cream or your cake or whatever, and suddenly you've got a minty item. It's delicious. All right. Same way with vanilla. Now vanilla, that's the opposite. Instead of making an extract out of an herb, there we're making an extract out of a bean, the vanilla bean. So that would be a spice. All right. The seed of the plant is that spice. All right. And the vanilla is delicious. And I want to mention, while we're talking about vanilla, the difference between fake and real. Folks, let me show you. Maple syrup. If you've never had real maple syrup, if it doesn't actually say grade, whatever, amber syrup, then it isn't the real thing, because they'll be graded A or B or whatever. And, you know, that's the way they're filtered and cooked. This one is a grade A syrup. It is a very high quality syrup. These do cost a little bit more, but you use about half as much. And once you've tasted real maple, you might think, wow, the other stuff just doesn't taste the same. And it doesn't. You know, most of those maple syrups that you see on the shelf in the plastic squeeze bottles, that's flavored corn syrup, and it doesn't taste like the real thing. The flavored or the artificial vanilla doesn't taste like real vanilla. And frankly, I prefer Mexican vanilla over American. Mexican vanilla is processed differently and has a different flavor to it. It is cleaner tasting. It tastes more like the actual vanilla bean. So I like to use that. It just depends on how things are processed. Sometimes they get over-processed. So there you have spices and herbs and how they're also imparted in different things. Mustard. Here's some Dijon mustard. I've got yellow mustard back here. Well, that's mustard seed that's been ground up and then mixed with other items, such as some vinegar. Your yellow mustard, it's predominantly, sometimes there's some turmeric in it, almost always a natto, and there's mustard seed, and there's vinegar. And that's what makes up the vast majority of those yellow mustards. It's very simple. It's a prepared spice. Okay, horseradish, same way. It's a prepared spice. That's a root that has been ground and then used as a preparation to make a horseradish sauce. It's very strong, very robust, and has a profound effect in dishes and with meat. Okay, so we've looked at that. Now let's think about drinks. Some drinks are made of herbs. Some drinks are made of spices. Okay, so we're back to those herbs and spices again, aren't we? Well, here's an example. Here is a spice. These are coffee beans. That's actually a spice. It really is. We drink it, but it is still a spice. You can use this wonderful spice ground in many different ways. It's one of the ingredients in making red-eye gravy. I've had some European chocolate that had ground coffee in it. Real coffee grinds in dark chocolate. And believe me, the flavor, oh, it was heavenly. I need to reproduce it for my show. It's just so wonderful. And we drink tea. Well, there we have an item that's made from leaves. If you want to find out what your lavender tastes like, make a lavender tea. Suddenly you know what it tastes like. And how to use it, well, that flavor, you can just try it in different things and kind of get a feel for it. Why don't you add it to some rice and see what it does for you there? Well, we've covered a lot of different things here. We've talked about real versus fake, how spices are used in different food preparations and in drinks, how herbs are used in food preparations and drinks. There's a lot of different ways of getting those flavors into our food and even changing those flavors and putting them on or into our food. Sometimes we use vegetables and fruits for spices. All right? Let me give you an example. Here I've got onion powder. We use onions all the time in our cooking. I've got garlic out here, and we often put garlic powder in our food. So garlic is used as a spice in a raw form or in a powdered form, processed. Onions are considered just a food substance, but are also often dried and used as flakes or powder to put into food. And by the way, powdered onion tastes distinctly different than fresh. So don't let the two confuse you. Just understand it's not the same. One is different from the other. It's the same way with the garlic. It tastes different. Chili powder, you know, like that we talked about earlier. Cumin, paprika. Those are chili powders. And so it's the chili pod that's been dried and then ground up and powdered. You know, that's really cool. But you also can make it into a preparation. For instance, here we've got chipotle chilies made into a sauce. And over here we've got piquin and what other kind of chilies they have in there? The arbol and piquin chilies made into a sauce. Okay, so they had to grind that and make it into a powder, and then they made a sauce from it. Okay, again, we're back to those, what are the spices? So our flavorants run across the board. You've got some things that are combinations of flavors. For instance, balsamic vinegar or Worcestershire sauce. It's a combination of different spices and herbs and things like that, loaded in a solution of a type. Each one has their own flavors, okay? They're both good. They really make for very good foods. For instance, if you want a pot roast that really pops with brown gravy that stands out above the rest, make your pot roast and your brown gravy with a little Worcestershire sauce. That's the acid that you're looking for. That's another thing, acid. You know, we hear about put acid in your food. The flavors, you hear chefs say the flavor is flat, it needs acid. So we put acid in our food. I've got lemon juice back there. That's acid. I've got some vinegar here and over here. These are both are acids, okay? And there's other acids here too. The mustard has vinegar in it. That's acidic, all right? So there's all kinds of different acids that we get from some of our flavorants, okay? Vinegar imparts a flavor as well as an acid, okay? Lemon juice gives a certain flavor as well as an acid. So does lime juice. I use them both regularly in my cooking. Depends on what I'm making as to what I'll put it on. Folks, developing the palate is about tasting different things and about combining different flavors. And when it comes to spices and herbs, you can say, I don't know how much to use. Let me explain something. When I was a little boy, I was learning to cook, and I got a wok for Christmas. It was really cool. So I'm in the kitchen wanting to cook up this food. I've got it all chopped and prepared. I'm ready to go. And I say to my mother, I said, Mom, I'm not sure about this. And she said, what are you unsure about? I said, well, I've never made this, and I don't know how much of any of these ingredients to use. How much garlic do I put in? How much ginger? How much relative to each other and to the ingredients I'm using? My mother said something that stuck with me for the rest of my life. So here's what she said. She said, son, if you're going to cook, you can't be afraid of flavor. That changed my approach from that day on. I've been cooking that way ever since. If I don't know what a flavor is, I get it and I try it. That's the reason I know so many different products, so many different tastes. That's the reason there are a lot of items I won't touch or eat because I've tasted them and I either didn't like them or I didn't like the way they were made or what was in them. So please, please, taste different things. Taste different preparations and different foods and different ways of making things. It's all about developing the palate. You got to develop those taste buds. Get them accustomed to certain flavors and accustomed to certain textures, because the texture is all part of it. Okay? Please work on your palate. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it helped to clear a few things up. And to Gail E., who was the person who mentioned to me in my in the comments, Gail said, please do another video and address spices and herbs and flavorings. You know, how do I use these things? Well, Gail, I can't tell you how much onion powder to put in your beans. I really can't. You're going to have to start with a teaspoon, and if you can't taste it, add another one. And that's the way you learn how much to use. You also watch videos. There are people like myself who've got a lot of experience using different flavors and will gladly guide you in the path. Let me give you an example. I mentioned marinara earlier. A marinara sauce, if I make a heavy one, okay, there's one that I make that I simmer all day. It's going to have basil and rosemary and oregano and thyme, but it's not going to have the same amount. If I am cooking a pot of marinara that requires 4 tablespoons of basil, or that's 1/4 of a cup, by the way, then I'm going to use maybe a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of oregano with that. Otherwise, my oregano will quickly overwhelm the flavor and the sweetness of that basil. The only way I could have known that was to have used both of them over the years. And learning from those that knew more than I did when I was younger. And I still learn from others. I still pay attention to what really good chefs say, because learning never ends. And developing your palate never ends. It only grows bigger and better daily. All right? Even if you don't drink rum, you should know what it tastes like. All right? You can't make rum balls without it. Even if you don't drink wine or alcohol at all, you should know what they taste like so you can know how to cook with them. Sometimes you make batter with beer. Even if you don't drink, the batter is still perfectly good to use. It's not going to make you drink. It's just going to be good batter. So flavors from all of the things around us, please use them. If you'll notice, there's a wide variety, and these are just a small cross sample of what I have sitting in my fridge and cabinet. Just a tiny amount. And constantly I'm pulling different things out for flavors. Once you've tried capers for the first time in a lemon sauce, you'll be buying capers from then on. They're delicious. By themselves, they're not remarkable. They're kind of salty. But when you combine them in the right sauces, they're really good. Folks, taste, 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 and don't stop. The more you learn, the better you'll cook. And it's only one path, and that's through the palate. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today. Please take a look at my channel. There's a lot of different recipes there, a lot of different flavors for you to try, and different quantities of seasonings and flavors for you to learn from. So there's a lot of palate teasers in my channel. All right, there's hundreds of videos there. Take a look at that. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Click the bell so you can get your little notification. You know, YouTube has to make it difficult for us. Please leave comments if you have questions or anything you want to say. If you have a request, just like Gail got, you might be surprised at what you get if you make a request. And thank you very much for watching. Folks, please have a good day. Bye-bye. Now I've got to clean all this up. No time like the present.